About a year ago, in February of 2025, you wrote that Europe needs a foreign policy that is realistic, understands Russia's situation, understands Europe's situation, understands what America is and what it stands for, and that tries to avoid Europe being invaded by the United States. It's certainly not impossible that Trump's America will land troops in Greenland. I'm not joking, and I don't think Trump is joking. So, of course, a year ago, the Europeans were a bit dismissive about these ideas. No, not so much anymore. And now, of course, forward 1 year, the Europeans are very outraged, not necessarily expressing it to Trump very clearly, as they find themselves on the receiving end of US hostilities. And they suddenly have rediscovered the importance of international law and principles, even though they helped to tear this down over the past 30 years. So I was wondering how you make sense of all of this, because following what's happened in Davos yesterday, and how do you read the situation?
President Kennedy in 1961 in his inaugural address said, he who would ride on the back of a tiger often comes back inside the tiger. If you think that you're going to live on the back of a predator, you may be the next meal. I think the Europeans forgot that over 30 years. When I mean what I meant in saying to the European Parliament, you should understand what the United States is, I meant that they should understand the United States is an imperial power. It acts brazenly and brutally. And for about 20 years, almost no European leader said a word against that predatory behavior by the United States. As the U.S. invaded one country after another, as it overthrew governments, as it played recklessly in Ukraine, the Europeans were quiet. They may even have liked it, as the U.S. was complicit in Israel's disastrous wars across Africa and the Middle East, as the United States went to war in Iraq, went to war in Libya, overthrew or assigned the CIA to overthrow the government of Syria, played a very deep and destructive role in the overthrow of Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014. The European leaders just were silent. When the United States bombed Iran last June, the European leaders said, oh, Iran, you should exercise restraint. They didn't tell the United States to exercise restraint. When the United States kidnapped the president of Venezuela, the European leaders were fine. He's a bad guy. But then, when the United States said, we want Greenland, oh, no, that's unfair. What about international law? You have to respect things. And the New York Times discovered that America has imperial tendencies. It hadn't mentioned that for several decades, actually. But it discovered it because now it was talking about a European country and a European territory. So there's a lot of naivete and hypocrisy in everything that's been going on in recent times. To put my position very clear, I think the United States is thuggish, imperialistic, reckless, and that the U.S. has left a large swath of the world in misery. And Europe has been mostly compliant or complicit in a lot of that outside Europe. So I sympathize with the Europeans, of course I do, about Greenland. This is just a grotesque power grab by Trump. But I wish that the Europeans had exercised some awareness, prudence, and actually capacity in recent years to tell the United States don't behave that way. Also, from a very realist point of view, if I may say so, the Europeans were absurd in their Russophobia. that wasn't realism, that was self-destruction. Rather than keeping lines of communication open with Russia, they left everything to the United States. So now they find themselves completely boxed in because they have no diplomacy with Russia. They basically have no diplomacy with the United States. They basically have no diplomacy, is the reality of Europe right now. But they did that to themselves. And I don't like to say it, but I have to say I told you so to them because I've been saying this for years to the European leaders. So have you. Get your act together. Have a diplomatic policy. Understand what the United States is all about. Don't be so hypocritical, it will come back to haunt you. These are all the basic truths of the last few days.
Yeah, I think the European idea is that much like the Cold War, the hatred of Russia should unify the West. But the problem is this is not the Cold War. The Americans do not see the Russians as a main adversary. So the only thing happens by pushing this crazy Russophobia is the Europeans make themselves more dependent on the US, while the US has less interest in sharing this common balancing. So they make themselves subservient. But I try to make this point in Europe, but I'm told that this is Russian propaganda. So
right. It's not Russian propaganda. We see right before our eyes what the consequences of all of this have turned out to be, which is Europe bereft of any security, any capacity to discuss issues. They're running around in an absolute panic. In a sense, you don't blame them, except that they had a lot of warning in this, including the one that I gave to them last February. But of course, you and I have been making these warnings for many, many years.
But a lot of things happened now in Davos, though. The most interesting speech maybe was from Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney. He more or less admitted that the whole so-called rules-based international order was a fraud, that it gave the West certain specific privileges. Yeah, they can refer to liberal democracy and human rights to push aside international law. Of course, that's the exclusive prerogative of the West, so a hegemonic concept. But now, of course, they find themselves on the outside, as you suggested, and this is not acceptable. I thought this was quite remarkable because this suggested a change in world order. Canada has to diversify. The Europeans, though, have been much weaker in their response. Macron even sent a private message to Trump, which was shared, in which he said, more or less trying to get on the inside, saying, "Oh, we agree everything you're doing against Syria, Iran. Let's work on this together. Just leave Greenland alone." So trying to get back on the inside, while NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spent the entire interview I watched celebrating Daddy and why he's been the most wonderful thing ever to happen to NATO. Even at the same time, Trump shared a message saying that the real enemy of America is from within, which is NATO. So it's quite remarkable to watch.